Greetings from Stanford University. I'm Bill Barnett, professor at the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability and the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
And I'm Samuel Minev Benzecry, junior at Stanford University, studying Earth Systems and Linguistics.
And we have with us here in the studio Professor Rodolfo Dirzo of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability, and Professor Dan Stewart from Gonzaga University, and here at Stanford's Hoover Institution, Director of Indigenous Student Seminar. Rodolfo, Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Bill. This is a wonderful experience and conversation with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, and Rodolfo and Dan, it's been amazing. You're running the conference here on environmental justice through an indigenous lens or through indigenous lenses.
Yeah.
And Sam, you've been attending the conference. What's your reaction to what you've seen?
I've found it really important so far to see the Doerr School and the business school engaging with non-Western ways of thinking and in conversation with Western ways of thinking, and highlighting the importance of preservation and of ensuring the health of native populations in the United States and beyond.
So, Sam, I still remember when I was at your family farm there near Manaus, and we had the honor of visiting one of the indigenous tribes there, which is, in fact, making a living with agroforestry in that area. So it must have struck a chord with you to hear indigenous voices here at Stanford where you're a student.
Definitely, and I think one of my interests back home especially is looking at these sources of these economic sources that are non-predatory and that ensure long-term preservation, and many times this comes in the form of bioeconomy. So mycology is just one facet of this endeavor, and I find it very important to see it not only there with the resources that are available there, but also here in the United States in the ways that are available in here. So I find it really important for an institution like Stanford to have these voices included. Professor Dirzo, do you see similar cases in Mexico, in Oaxaca? Do you have any examples of use of bioeconomy from indigenous groups that give valuable lessons to us in the context of this conference?
That's a very interesting question, Sam. And I can actually make a reference to a number of examples, but in the interest of brevity, I can mention the case of an indigenous community in Oaxaca, the Zapotec community. My friends, they're doing incredible forest management. They have a system of rotation in the use of the land for the gathering of timber for the purposes of producing furniture and so on and so forth. If you look at the satellite image of the areas they are managing, it has more forest cover than the areas outside. What they do is they have this very sophisticated way of rotating the use of the land, and then they allow for the forest to recover. They will not come back to a particular spot until the forest has recovered its complete structure, and they use the money to reinvest in the maintenance of the forest, to support the local community, and they use also, they have a furniture factory from the timber that they extract, and they use that to provide furniture for schools, for libraries, and so on. They make money, and they maintain the forest in a remarkable way. And that's an example of the many ways in which indigenous peoples are actually going to the question of using their resource in a sustainable way while maintaining the nature and the biodiversity of the place. It is to me, Bill, very interesting to see that in this conference, we had not only multiple representations of indigenous peoples, amazing element of this conference is we have brought together different tribes, different communities, which is an incredible thing. They've been praising that component of the conference. But the other important element to me in this conference is to have brought people with different disciplines, including the disciplines of the economics and the disciplines that have to do with the real value of indigenous peoples and the wealth of indigenous people. And we had two interesting, fantastic presentations in that area. And one of them was in the area that Dan Stewart, who is visiting with us, actually provided with the community. Dan, I would love to ask to have you please make a brief comment of the main recommendations that you would have for people about doing a real appreciation of the value of indigenous peoples.
That's a part of the lecture I didn't actually get to. So part of what, we had to cut things a little short, but I do talk a little bit about like how do tribes add value in the marketplace. So and part of what brings me to the table is like you talk about. I mean, I think part of our introduction was, well, you said you want to come to should we do a sustainability conference? So, well, I don't think about sustainability just in terms of environment. I think sustainability in terms of economies and communities and organizations and cultures, and to me, and environment too. But to me, they're all like intertwined in this tapestry that if one starts to fall apart, then the other doesn't. So, so my specific lectures are what can tribes do to make sure that their economies are stable, and so in sustainability in that sense is like, is your economy going to live to the next generation, into the next decade, and will your culture stay intact to the next generation? And to do that, at least with indigenous peoples, you can't separate that from environmental issues. And I love the story you gave out, because that's a story of entrepreneurship and economics and environment all mixed together. Like we're going to pay attention to sustainable environmental issues, but use it in a way that we can create some economic benefit for our people, and so that's really sort of the main message is you have to consider these other variables in there as well. And so my specialty is entrepreneurship and in business. So I'm always telling people, well, if anything that you're going to do, any project that you're going to have within your community, within your tribe, you're going to have to understand how to build resources around that project. You're going to have to understand how to sell people on the ideas. You're going to have to understand how to harness finances and resources. And there's just a ton of business and economics and entrepreneurship training that I think is a natural complement to the great things that we're doing here in teaching people sciences.
Dan, you had such an incredible number of key concepts and notions that you shared yesterday with us. There's two things that I would like to ask you, please share with our listeners. One is the concept of tribal sovereignty, and the other one that you touched on is that we want to help and support these communities because they have multiple values. And you mentioned the case of the languages, that we should not be losing their languages, we should not be losing those elements of their incredible culture and contribution to the beauty and wealth of our planet.
Yeah.
A little bit of comment on that, please.
Yeah. So let's start with tribal sovereignty. That's a lot of people don't realize that within America there are 574 recognized tribes, right? Yeah. And each of those tribes gets treated by the federal government as an independent nation. So they have what's called tribal sovereignty, and in some ways that's probably really frustrating to the states because tribes don't answer to state law. I mean, if you want to do business and deal with state, say for instance, if you want to open a casino, well, you have to make compacts with the state and agreements with the state. But in the end, you're really only beholden to the federal government. So you get and the federal government will treat you like it would any other nation state to some regard. So so a lot of tribes have these compacts and they have agreements, they have treaties with the federal governments, and some of those treaties are 100, 150, 200 years old, and they're still binding. I'm not going to say they've always been recognized by the federal government, but it creates a unique opportunity. If you're a tribe, it's like you're sitting there as an independent nation. And the benefit and the opportunity is, as an independent nation, you can create your own commercial codes, you can create your own laws, you can decide what's legal and illegal on your own reservation within the bounds of what the federal government says is okay. So we're reaching a point where tribes are becoming sophisticated to the idea that if we write our own laws, we can create opportunities for businesses to come in here. We can make it so we can make force people to come in here and do sustainable business. We can force people to come in and hire our people. And so it turns out to be, there's constrictions around it, because obviously you don't own the land, the federal government owns the land, but it creates opportunity that others perhaps don't have.
So Bill, it was fantastic that you had the idea of connecting with Dan, which again, and then that connected me with Nick. So these two contributions in the conference were a tremendous highlight, and I am sure that the students and everybody who was there learned so much. Certainly, I learned a lot, and I think it was fantastic to have this perspective also as part of the conference.
I agree with that, and what I'd love to ask actually each of you is, what big surprise came out of the conference?
I think the big surprise to me is even though like some of the presentations yesterday were, they're science presentations like I would expect if I was sitting in a biology, a seminar, and even though those aren't the exact things I study, I was pleasantly surprised at the alignment that we have, and everything that's going on over here in the Dover School and these projects that people are presenting are all in alignment with what we're trying to do with the Renewing Indigenous Economies Project, is to ensure that people go forward and they have a path to create that's their own, defined on their own terms, with their own language, controlling the natural resources that are available to them in a way that's suitable to their history and their culture and what they believe is the right path going forward. And we had some fantastic case studies of tribes that have been able to do just that. Yeah. I mean, there's a presentation about the Klamath tribe, about what happened when they removed their dam. They removed their dam, and all of a sudden, cultural things that had been lost to their people came back. And so it wasn't just an economic benefit; it was a cultural benefit as well. And they showed studies of well-being, so it's affecting the psychological well-being of all their citizens and all their people, and that's what we're all about. So we all have the same mission. We're just looking at different aspects of it. And my surprise was how well we actually fit together and complement each other.
Related to what you're saying, Dan, I found it very encouraging, the extent to which these local communities and indigenous people who are participating in the conference actually were open and willing and embracing the science component. And so this vision of having these two views, these two ways of knowing, coming together and being appreciated by the two parties, that to me was fantastic. Another element that I'd like to mention is that, of course, we're very concerned about the issues of environmental injustice in the country, but this is not unique to this country. And we had a wonderful presentation on the situation of gold mining in Brazil and tremendous consequences of that. And we're going to have more presentations by people from the Masai Mara in Kenya, telling us about the challenges that they see. But I love that the welcoming of the community that is attending this conference in terms of appreciating that these are not unique problems of the North America or the U.S.
Oh, certainly that. And one of the things that has struck me about the roster that you've put together for this conference, and Sam, I would guess you might even have the same reaction, is that we typically think in terms of the distinct, separate lenses through which we view sustainability, a technical perspective or maybe a behavioral perspective, and then separate out the moral and ethical perspective of environmental justice, the fact that the very people who suffer so often because of the changes we see going on in the climate, for instance, are those least responsible, those indigenous people who are least responsible.
And are going to be impacted the most, or are being impacted the most.
And I would add, there was a great point made yesterday, it's not just the people. Like when you're talking about environmental issues, there's animals also. I mean, there's a lot of innocents that are just not just human.
Yeah, so well put. Thank you for that, Dan.
I use the example of multi-species environmental justice, bringing the concept that other species are also being suffering the injustices, environmental injustice. I talk about the case of animals and the significance of that for the indigenous communities as well. This is the loss of culture, the loss of interactions, and the loss of the cosmovisions of animal and plant life.
Yeah, I think what called most my attention was how I see the Dover School molding into into this model that I think is more appropriate for the Anthropocene. This model, which includes indigenous voices, the more than human perspectives too, and it has a technical side, a scientific method backing it. I think the Klamath Falls example is an interesting one because I've heard of it for the first time as a freshman taking Earth Systems 10, and at the time things were still murky. Like there's no. It was still like a battle, like whether the dams would be removed or not. And throughout my time at Stanford, like from a distance, I've followed this project. And yesterday I could see it's in only a span of 3 years, like from battling to victory, to the removal of these dams and the result that it has in the livelihoods of these communities. So I thought it was beautiful to see it. And I thought that this is the type of story that will mold, in a way, the future of the School of Sustainability and how it deals with environmental justice issues domestically and abroad. So I was very moved by it.
It was a very powerful moment. It doesn't matter which discipline you're from, if you're from science or economics or which, it doesn't matter which region of the world you're from either. That was a very moving and touching story. And I think everybody in the room was affected by watching the video of that dam being removed and the river coming back.
And then the fact that there's dams all over the planet, right? I mean, what they shared with us, that's an interesting example of the things that can be done globally. Yeah. That was very interesting.
Very inspiring. And so we've come to the end of our podcast. Sam, Professor Rodolfo Dirzo, Professor Dan Stewart, thank you very much for coming to the podcast and for running this tremendous conference. And to all you listeners, from me, Bill Barnett, and Stanford University, until next time. The Stanford Initiative on Business and Environmental Sustainability podcast series is sponsored by the Stanford Graduate School of Business and the Stanford Dorr School of Sustainability. Music by Charged Particles. That's Caleb Hutzler, Mike Rock, and John Krosnick.